I'm Joanna Simpson here at Risk Minds International in London. Joining me now is Bonnie Frank, Managing Director and Head of Private Investment and Enterprise Risk at PSP Investments. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And how has risk culture changed over the past few years? What are the biggest differences you've seen compared to 5 years ago, for example?
It's a very interesting question because when we look at it, if we go back 5 years or even a bit more, it was always thought of a nice to have or an enhancement of your risk framework in an organization. But now when we look at it, it takes on a much broader sense. Obviously, it's something that regulators have been focused on, but more and more, and I would say especially today after some recent events, it's a requirement now, whether it be from our stakeholders, shareholders for public entities, also employees, and as well as the partners or others that we deal with in business.
And this year you're talking about diversity and inclusion at Risk Minds. What are the key takeaways from your talk?
Yeah, so one of the interesting parts is it ties really well into the risk culture. Because when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we want to take a broad view of it. But when you look at risk culture, we're also taking a broader view. It's not something that can be left in the risk management department. It has to permeate throughout the organization so that the business decision makers or those taking larger choices within the organization and for them are really taking a risk approach. And it's the same thing that we bring back to diversity and inclusion. We heard the other day from Oliver Wyman, who talked about the 3 megatrends, which were AI, geopolitical, and macroeconomic events, which I think is no surprise to many. And diversity and inclusion plays so well into that, because in order to have a broader approach and be able to tackle these new areas, AI being one, and then other areas, we're no stranger to macroeconomic events or geopolitical, but I think it's taken on a heightened focus recently, especially on the geopolitical front. We're going to need a diversity of talent. We're also going to need diversity of opinion in order to approach these. You look at AI, we either need to upskill our employees, but also look at who has the capacity and who are we going to be bringing on the team. In order for those people to be successful and really drive home, which will only enhance culture across the firm, we're going to have to look outside the typical norm. Another really interesting point that came up on diversity and inclusion, I think, is the authenticity factor that people are looking for. So it's one thing for companies to sort of have a tick-the-box approach that perhaps was standard before, but employees and I think even stakeholders, whoever they may be, are looking to see why is it important to an organization and where are they gaining value from it. One of the ways that we discussed was to make it a bit more concrete and look at data. And do we see parallels, for example, with areas such as ESG in data collection, but also standardization so that we can do benchmarking and be able to see our progress, but share that information more widely. For the banking area, especially ones that are more customer-facing, there was talk how customers and even clients want to recognize themselves in the people that they're partnering or choosing to do business with going forward. And I think we're going to see more of a push in that way, where it becomes something that's coming directly from the public, the client, from organizations or customers. And that's where we'll also see a drive and change.
So very interesting points there. So what positive changes would you like to see in the industry, particularly as we start to enter a new year?
Yeah, I think going into this new year and facing some of the situations we've experienced even recently, we don't have to go that far back to look at some crises and some of the CRO panels were mentioning it's a permanent state of affairs these days. So I really hope as we head into this new year that we take the lessons we learned, be it from the SVB banking crisis in the US, which I think there's a lot of good lessons learned to be taken from there, or even some of the issues that we're seeing now. It can test many factors. We heard from one CRO from the World Bank, actually, who was touching on the human aspect of having to move her own staff around and having to deal with those issues, which can touch on personal and how we take those and keep improving on them, which again will go back to improvement of risk culture. So identification of issues, our resiliency to them, and our ability to act and implement what did we learn from the previous crisis would be one element.
A lot to learn at the moment.
A lot to learn, yes, positively and not so much.
Bonnie Frank, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, appreciate it.